Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be looking at some recent US news, but here's the twist. We're doing it through the lens of CNN in Espanol.
That's right. We'll be exploring how this Spanish language news source is covering a whole range of topics. Things like politics, immigration, even some viral news.
I think you'll be surprised at some of the different angles and nuances we uncover along the way.
Absolutely. It's like getting a fresh perspective on stories you might think you already know.
Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the big stories that caught my eye was, well, you guessed it, another Trump versus Biden clash.
Oh, it seems like those two are always making headlines.
This time, Trump is criticizing some of Biden's decisions, specifically on selling parts of the border wall and extending telework for federal employees. But what I find interesting is how this connects to the bigger picture of the Republican Party. What do you think?
Well, it seems like Trump's criticisms are resonating with a certain segment of the population, maybe even strategically aimed at energizing his base. And this is definitely stirring things up within the Republican Party itself.
Yeah, for example, you have someone like Mitt Romney, who actually came out in support of some of Trump's criticisms.
Yeah, which is interesting because he's also been a vocal critic of Trump in the past.
Exactly. But here's where it gets even more, complicated. Romney also acknowledged that the Magie movement is basically the Republican Party now.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
It speaks to that internal struggle within the party. You have figures like Romney who are critical of Trump's approach, but they also recognize the power of the Magie base. It makes you wonder, how does the Republican Party move forward with these seemingly opposing forces?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And as if the political landscape wasn't already wild enough, there are now rumors swirling about Kamala Harris potentially running for California governor.
Wow, now that would be a game changer. I mean, if she were to win, it could significantly impact her chances of a 2028 presidential run.
It's like everyone's constantly maneuvering, positioning themselves for the next big move. It's like political chess.
And the stakes are high.
Definitely. And speaking of unfolding situations, CNN en Español also covered some pretty unsettling news about crime and safety in the U.S. There was a school shooting in Madison, Wisconsin that tragically claimed the lives of at least 2 people.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. It's a stark reminder of the gun violence problem in this country. And CNN en Español really highlighted the raw emotion, the grief and anger within the community.
And it makes you think, are there different conversations happening about gun control within Spanish-speaking communities? Different perspectives on solutions being explored?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex issue with so many different angles. And then there are these unsettling drone sightings that have been causing a lot of anxiety. Authorities are trying to reassure the public, but there's this definite sense of unease. Like, what are these drones doing? Who's controlling them?
It's almost like something out of a science fiction movie, this unseen presence just creating tension and fear.
And that feeling of uncertainty, it seems to connect to some of the other crime stories too.
Right, like the case in New Mexico where a teenager is accused of killing 4 members of his own family.
The details are still emerging, but it's a tragedy.
It is. It's incredibly sad. And then there's a story about the murder of the United Healthcare CEO, which adds to that feeling of unease.
Yeah, the source doesn't give any specific information about a suspect, but it does mention that the founder of the company that made the backpack used in the murder he's dealing with threats and rumors.
It's a strange twist how an event like this can have such far-reaching and unexpected consequences.
It makes you realize how interconnected everything is, how one event can ripple outwards, affecting people in situations you might never expect.
Absolutely. Speaking of unexpected, let's switch gears and talk about immigration. CNN en Español reported on changes to the green card application process, though the source didn't go into specifics.
It's kind of frustrating, They mention these changes but don't detail what they are or when they'll take effect.
Right. It leaves us with a lot of questions. What are the implications of these changes? How might they affect people who are trying to immigrate to the U.S.? It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Definitely. And it brings to mind all the talk about immigration, especially when it comes to Trump.
Yeah, remember his campaign promise to hire Americans? Well, it seems that his companies are still hiring foreign workers.
Huh. That's interesting. Makes you wonder about the consistency between his rhetoric and his actual business practices.
Right. Okay, before we move on, I want to touch on the economy because CNN en Español highlighted a very real concern for many Americans: rising food prices.
It's something that's affecting everyone, hitting people's wallets hard, and it's definitely contributing to the anxieties people have about the cost of living in the U.S. these days.
Absolutely. Now, are you ready for something a little lighter?
Sure. Let's take a break from all the serious stuff. What do you have?
Well, there's this story about a controversial license plate in California that went viral. Some people interpreted it as mocking the October 7th attack on Israel.
Wow, you wouldn't think a license plate could cause such a stir.
But it did. And the agency responsible for issuing the license plate has since issued an apology. But the conversation, it's still going on.
It shows how sensitive and interconnected our world is, especially with social media amplifying things. Even seemingly small things can become major news stories and ignite strong emotions.
And this next story also highlights unintended consequences in our interconnected world. Remember we talked about the murder of the United Healthcare CEO? Well, CNN en Español also reported that the founder of the company that made the backpack used in the crime is now receiving threats and facing rumors.
It's a reminder that actions, or even associations, can have unintended consequences, especially when information spreads so quickly, sometimes even misinformation, Makes you think about the responsibility we all have in how we consume and share information.
It really does. I mean, this whole collection of news from CNN and Español, it paints such a complex picture.
Right.
We've gone from political power struggles to heartbreaking tragedies to economic worries and even a bizarre viral story about a license plate. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is, and it's all happening against this backdrop of like a larger societal context.
That's what I keep coming back to. Like, what does it all mean? What does this collection of news from CNN and Español tell us about the U.S. right now? We've gone from these political power struggles to these just heartbreaking tragedies to anxieties over the economy, and then even this really strange viral story about a license plate. Like, how do we make sense of it all?
It is a complicated picture, isn't it? There's definitely an undercurrent there, a sense of tension, maybe even a feeling like things are unraveling a little bit. And I think seeing it all through the lens of CNN and Español, it adds another layer to that.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how different communities within the U.S. are processing all these events. What's being highlighted, what's being downplayed, and how are these conversations playing out in different languages, different cultural contexts,
Those are all important questions, and it brings us back to something we talk about a lot, like the importance of staying informed. But not just passively scrolling through headlines. It's about really digging deeper, considering the source, seeking out those diverse viewpoints.
Because otherwise you're only getting a fraction of the story, right?
Exactly.
And for our listener, I think the key takeaway here is to be an active participant in this crazy information landscape. Don't just accept what you're given. Question your assumptions. Look for those connections between these events that seem totally unrelated, and be open to the nuances.
Because often those nuances, they reveal the most insightful truths. So, thinking about everything we've just discussed, what is resonating with you the most? What's really piqued your curiosity?
Honestly, for me, it's that sense of unease we were talking about. It just seems to run through so many of these stories, whether it's the anxiety around the drone sightings or the economic worries about food prices or even that unsettling story about the backpack manufacturer receiving threats. There's this underlying feeling of vulnerability, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's almost like these individual stories are actually symptoms of a much larger societal anxiety, like a sense that things are a little bit out of control.
Right, and that feeling, it's definitely amplified when you consider the role of information or misinformation in today's world. I mean, we saw how quickly those rumors spread in the United Healthcare CEO murder case. And that license plate story shows how easy it is for things to be, misinterpreted and just blown out of proportion on social media.
It's true. It's like a constant challenge to navigate this information overload and figure out what's real, what's actually important, and what's just noise.
And I think CNN and Español's coverage really highlights that challenge in a way that English language media sometimes misses. They're reporting on the same events, but through a different cultural lens, a different set of priorities and concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good reminder that there isn't just one narrative, one way of interpreting events. There are multiple truths, multiple perspectives, and we need to engage with all of them if we really want to understand the complexity of, everything that's going on.
And sometimes those complexities, well, they can be unsettling, right?
Definitely.
But they can also be incredibly enlightening, don't you think?
Yeah, I think discomfort can actually be a catalyst for growth. Yeah. It forces us to confront those assumptions we have, to broaden our horizons, and to really search for that deeper meaning.
So as we wrap up this exploration of U.S. news, Through the lens of CNN in Espanol, I'm left with this lingering question. Are these seemingly disparate events, from these political clashes to anxieties over drones, rising prices, are they indicative of a deeper societal unease in the U.S.? Is there this sense of fragmentation, of things not quite working as they should?
That's a big question, and there are no easy answers, of course.
Yeah.
But I think it's an essential question to explore because whether this unease is real or perceived, the impact is real. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's affecting people's everyday lives, the decisions they make, their outlook on the future. And it's also shaping the political landscape, right?
Yeah.
It's fueling those divisions we're seeing play out, like between Trump and Biden, between the MAGA movement and the people who feel increasingly alienated from it.
Absolutely. And we can't forget those economic anxieties either, those worries about, things like rising food prices and just the general cost of living. Those pressures, they can really exacerbate social tensions, leading to a sense of scarcity and competition.
Yeah, like everyone's fighting for a piece of a shrinking pie.
Exactly.
It's almost like we're in this pressure cooker with all these different forces just simmering inside. And I think CNN on Espanol, by focusing on those human stories, the emotional impact of these events, they allow us to feel that pressure, that unease in a much more, I guess you could say, visceral way.
Yeah, I agree. They're not just reporting the facts, they're capturing the mood, the anxieties, the hopes and fears of a community that's grappling with all these complex issues.
And that's something that we often miss in mainstream coverage, I think. It's a good reminder that there are multiple narratives, multiple perspectives, and we need to engage with all of them to really understand the world around us.
That's exactly right. We've been taking this deep dive into U.S. news, looking at it through this lens of CNN Espanol, and what's emerged is this multifaceted picture of a nation at a crossroads. We see those political divides, the economic anxieties, the social tensions, and this sense of uncertainty about the future.
But we also see, resilience, community spirit, and a willingness to confront those challenges, even when they're tough. It's messy, it's complicated, but it's profoundly human.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to explore. This deep dive hasn't given us easy answers, but hopefully it's sparked new questions, new perspectives, and a deeper understanding of all the forces that are shaping the U.S. today.
And that's what we're always aiming for, right?
Exactly.
Because ultimately, it's not about arriving at some definitive conclusion. It's about embracing that complexity, engaging with different viewpoints, and just continuing to ask those tough questions.
It's a continuous journey. It's about seeking out those different sources, challenging those assumptions we all have, and connecting those dots between events that might seem totally unrelated.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, our hope is that you, the listener, feel empowered to continue that journey, to dig deeper, to broaden your understanding, and to contribute to those crucial conversations that are shaping the future of, well, not just the U.S., but the world.
Right. Yeah, keep diving, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep that curiosity alive.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, stay curious. It really is a lot to think about. So, as we're wrapping up this deep dive into U.S. news through the lens of CNN and Espanol, what's the one thing you would want our listeners to take away from this?
Well, I think it would be this. Don't settle for just one perspective, one narrative. Seek out those diverse viewpoints, be open to different interpretations, and challenge those assumptions. It's the only way we can truly understand the complexity of everything, really.
It's so easy to just get caught up in our own little bubbles, isn't it?
It is, but it's important to break out of those bubbles, engage in those conversations, even when they're difficult. Listen to people who have different experiences, different perspectives. That's where the real learning happens.
And that's what we're all about here, right?
Yeah.
Trying to understand the world a little bit better. So to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep that curiosity alive. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.